Уважаемые дамы и господа, сессия 2 «Ближний Восток. Трагедия и вызовы незавершенного конфликта» начинают свою работу. Пожалуйста, займите свои места. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Session 2, The Middle East, the Strategy and Challenges of the Unresolved Conflict, begins its work. Please proceed your seats. На сцену приглашаются модератор Виталий Наумкин, научный руководитель Института востоковедения РАН, академик Российской академии наук. Хатим Аль-Шанфари, профессор факультета экономики и финансов Университета Султана Кабуса, Оман. Хасан Унал, профессор факультета политологии и международных отношений Башкентского университета, Турция. Сайед Мохаммед Казем Саджатпур, заслуженный старший научный сотрудник Института политических и международных исследований Ирана, профессор школы международных отношений Иран. Али Аль-Ахмад, общественный деятель, советник Российского центра науки и культуры в Дамаске, Сирия. Рамзи Эззельдин Рамзи, дипломат, бывший старший заместитель секретаря МИД Египта, заместитель специального посланника ООН по Сирии с 2014 по 2019 годы. Ирина Звигельская, руководитель Центра ближневосточных исследований ММО РАН. Please welcome to the stage. Moderator Vitaly Naumkin, Scientific Director of the Institute of Oriental Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences, full member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Hatim Al-Shanfari, Professor of the Department of Economics and Finance, Qaboos Sultan University, Oman. Hassan Unal, Professor of the Department of Political Science and International Relations, Bashkent University, Turkey. Sayed Mohammed Kazem Sajjadpur, Senior Distinguished Fellow at the Institute for Political and International Studies, Professor of International Relations, School of International Relations, Iran. Ali Al-Ahmad, Advisor to the Russian Center of Science and Culture in Damascus, Syria. Ramzi Ezeldin Ramzi, former Senior Under-Secretary at the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Deputy Special Envoy for Syria. Irina Zviagelskaya, Head of the Center for the Middle East Studies, Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations.
Добрый день, добрый вечер, уважаемые участники.
Good afternoon. We have one housekeeping technical problem. We need just to change the listening devices, but we can start. Right now, my task is to have simplified, because they introduced every person. And then the position and of each person. So we have made all the introductions. So I'd like just to start with a short preamble, and then move over to give the floor to each of the participants. Probably just I would suggest that each one speaks for 5-7 minutes, and give a general idea of what they want to say, and then we'll do the questions and answers, and so we'll do it interactively. Like wise people in front of us, before us, were saying that the Middle East is obvious, and we know the problems, we know the issues, and we are witnesses of this horrible tragedy in the Gaza Strip, and the exacerbation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is a heart of a wider, more expanded conflict, one of the most lengthy conflicts in our history, and we remembered Mr. Primakov. I remember when I worked with him, he was the director of the Institute of Eastern Studies, and we had heated discussions. So whether it was possible to regulate, to settle the conflict in that area, so that all involved stakeholders would agree so to certain terms. And so then Mr. Primakov was right in saying that it's only themselves would be able or could settle this conflict and address this issue, but whether they would be able to do that certainly could be put in question. And so yes, I will just start this discussion, and I hope that it will trigger the discussion. And I'd like to start by saying that since one way or the other we always discuss the Gaza Strip, and then we're saying that Israel is doing this unproportionate response to the attack of the Hamas combatants to Israel. And so the number of victims is reaching 15,000, including women and children, which accounts for 70% of all the victims. And so then the question is, what's the plan of Israel? So that besides vengeance, what else do they want to do besides vengeance? So then certainly they certainly speak about one great big goal is destroying the infrastructure of Hamas and wiping Hamas out as a political movement, which is a tall order and highly unlikely. And so then what needs to be done and how? I will touch upon 5 points. I think 5 points. So then if we analyze all the discussions that we are having in different countries of the world, in Russia and other countries about Israel and the Arab world, so vis-a-vis what is it that Israel wants, then let me identify those points so that I could get some feedback to the 5 points that I would like to enumerate. First is reoccupation of the Gaza Strip by the Israeli army. I'm not talking about pros and contras because some will be for, some against. So some will say that they're not intending to occupy the Gaza Strip because the risk of high victim rate is quite likely. Then the second is placing or deploying, establishing, better to say, of military control over Gaza Strip, especially the northern part of Gaza, that has been practically so cleaned off the surface military personnel of Hamas, but not underground. And so another comment: what was done on the western bank. So that's military control. The third option is transfer of Gaza under the control of Egypt. So Egypt is against it, although I've talked to some Egyptian colleagues who were saying, so remember in the 60s, the Gaza Strip was under Egypt, and yes, we could handle the situation. So because we are 112 million people, very big. And so then we don't send them to Sinai, where there's lots of Bedouins and who are part of IGIL. So, but they will be okay. They will dissolve in the big population of Egypt and Baz. And so, but against their will to send them to Egypt is not right. and ISIS, right? And then to give Gaza Strip under Palestinian administration and to offer them this Palestinian autonomy. And the last option is international presence. National presence, military forces, and so then today we spoke about that, and so then about this option. Although I find it difficult to see what kind of state is ready to send military personnel so to support or regulate or settle or address this issue. I don't know who would dare to that. So there's looking at this bloodbath that's taking place there right now. So I would like just to limit myself. So they're not even comments, they're questions. And I would like just to offer this opportunity to touch upon about the prospects. Because we know what's being discussed on that side. But on the side of Hamas, we understand that the task is very simple: to free the territory, to make it free. And many of my colleagues and I think that Hamas is impossible to annihilate because that the cruelty that has been displayed by the Israeli troops is certainly a call to radicalism, and it will be only worse. At this point, I will stop, and I'd like to ask our Turkish colleague and friend to touch upon this issue, Hassan Unal, and to ask to belabor that point. Please, over to you.
Chairman, and first, let me start by thanking the Primakov Institute for issuing an invitation to me to participate in all the discussions and talk to such an esteemed audience like you on very important geopolitical issues. Now, I think this audience, all of us who have been following important geopolitical issues across the world, are knowledgeable enough about the Palestinian question. So I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of the Palestinian question, nor am I going to go into what can be done to basically resolve the issue in a sober environment. Politically, it is possible to come up with a solution to the problem by looking at the core issue and the core question by basically establishing two states. But we also know, I mean, it would be fair to establish two states perhaps, but at the same time, we all know that it is not going to be easy. Certainly not in the foreseeable future, because we are now confronted basically with an Israel which is run by politicians who are vying among themselves for further radicalism and almost bordering on racism of all sorts. So it is not going to be easy to establish two states, although that would probably address the core question in the region. What I would like to basically talk about are few points that are worth making about the worldwide consequences of the present ongoing massacres of genocidal dimension by Israel are likely to produce for the whole world. I think one point is about the loss of moral high ground by the West. I think this is a very important part of the whole thing, because we can easily dismiss the moral high ground that has been resorted to by the West on each and every question, and they used all the arguments like basically major concepts all of us dearly embrace, like democracy, democratization, basic human rights, freedoms and all that, but they have misused all of them so, over the last few decades so frequently. But at the same time, this was their ballistic missile. They used it as ballistic missiles in attacking any other country, when they wanted to destroy a country or when they wanted to destabilize a country. And quite a number of people across the world initially subscribed to that view that, some degree of democratization was possible and indeed necessary in certain parts of the globe. But after what we have been seeing, all these massacres and ethnic cleansing of a major scale that has been unfolding before our very eyes, it is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for any of the Western countries, particularly the United States, to come up and talk about the moral high ground. I would imagine now any non-Western leader or high-ranking official responding to any of his or her counterpart, when they even open their mouth with words like moral high ground and rules-based order, simply just shutting them up by saying, well, look, you are talking about democratization a la Gaza. Oh, we know it well, and we won't buy it. Thank you. Okay, and they have basically destroyed their very moral base on which they have made fortunes, politically speaking, okay? And from now on, that moral high ground has become almost valueless. It is like the stock exchange basically crashing, and then all the shares having no price at all, becoming like junk shares in the hands of so-called investors. Now, the other thing is, we can say, well, why is it now so important? From the establishment of Israel, we have known all along how brutal Israel can get and how severe they can attack the Palestinians, how severely they can attack the Palestinians, and how they can get engaged in ethnic cleansing of any sort. Why is this any different from the previous ones now? Well, I'd say there are, again, 2 points which I think worth mentioning. One is the scale on which the Israelis are now engaged in ethnic cleansing. I mean, in a very short span of time, something like a couple of months, we're talking about 15 to 20,000 people having been butchered. This is, and the second thing is, this has been live broadcast, okay? This has been live broadcast. And so we have the scale, which we haven't seen. It is certainly unprecedented. And the number of people, I mean, the Israelis have always been rough handling the Palestinians and all that. They have always been engaged in ethnic cleansing, but this time it has assumed industrial scale, industrial dimension. It is incredible. The other thing is, which is probably more important in terms of the effect that it is going to have on world politics, this is happening at the time of emerging multipolarity. I suppose when the world historians begin writing about the emergence of multipolarity, they are going to basically emphasize certain points, one of which is certainly going to be this conflict. I think when the Russian special military operation began in Ukraine, it certainly unleashed forces that were extremely powerful and extremely dedicated to bring about multipolarity. And Russian resilience has shown to the whole world, particularly in economic and military terms, that Russia is not going to be brought down to its knees. If anything, it's been the European countries that are actually suffering from the anti-Russia sanctions more than Russia itself. And all that brought about a feeling. It certainly led to a feeling across the world among all those countries who were somewhat longing for the end of unipolar world order in one form or the other, that something good may be on the horizon, okay? So, hence, so many African and other countries' leaders standing up to their Western counterparts and talking about in a very critical way of the West's handling of them, financially, militarily, politically, and what have you. And I think the historians will also put a lot of emphasis on the current crisis, because the Western world just basically destroyed its own standing on moral high ground in this particular conflict. The way they got together to support Israel so unconditionally, and the way they basically showed solidarity with Israel, again so unconditionally, leaves no moral high ground for them to basically come up with in their discussions to other countries. I think this, in terms of the consequences, this present tragic conflict has produced is going to be very interesting to follow in the years and decades to come. I think with this, I conclude, of course, being ready to answer any questions and comments. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, профессор.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now, just by way of clarification, I'd like just to ask one little question, follow-up question. It's a double question for you to clarify. Remembering the debates that we have in the expert communities in different countries, so there is a question. So that is asked always to both sides, put to both sides. On the one side is Hamas. Does this movement have a right that is located on the occupied territory, or doesn't it have the right to be involved in violent activities? So certainly they should not go outside the international humanitarian law. For freeing its territory, don't they have the, and on the part of Israel? A similar question put to Israel: does Israel have the right, being the occupying state, for self-protection? So these questions are being discussed at the United Nations and other institutions. Let me get your take on that.
I specifically refer to the two-state solution. That would mean that Israel would have the right to exist just as a proper, workable and governable Palestinian state next to it have the right to exist. So whether Hamas or other Palestinian authority, what I would say, the West and Israel should not and could not duck behind Hamas to basically justify what they have been doing. If Israel had been in good terms with any other Palestinian authority in bringing about a Palestinian state, a workable and governable Palestinian state on again workable and governable geography of its own, then we could have all dismissed Hamas, and then indeed there would have been perhaps no Hamas then. Okay, but Israel doesn't seem to be ready to negotiate anything with any Palestinian authority, with any Palestinians, except that they are just engaged in ethnic cleansing of all sorts. And this sort of occasional utterances by the Israeli politicians and by people like Netanyahu himself, leaves out no hope for the future that Israel will come to its senses, and then it will basically start a sensible dialogue with any Palestinian group or authority for a two-state solution. So that would be my response to all that. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you. And we have another Professor Sajapur who visits us quite often. He is our good friend. So let me direct the next question at you. In your presentation, I would request you to concentrate on the things to do so that the Russian requirements, the demands of Russian diplomacy on suspending the military activities and humanitarian break, the pause, and stopping the military activities. So what has to be done in order to for this appeal to be heard? So what should be done to stop those military activities in Gaza? And the question about the possible role of the international mediators. Vladimir Putin said that the attempt of the U.S. to monopolize the mediatory role has destructive nature, and it is not capable, and Israel cannot ensure safety of their citizens, of his citizens, through this tool of monopolized role by Americans. In this view, considering that the United States thus actually weaken these four mediators, can we actually talk about the again revival of its role, renewal of its role?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me first thank Emilio and Professor Dinkin for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be back in Moscow, and also it's a pleasure to be in a panel chaired by a very good friend, and I have to say one of the leading scholars globally on Middle Eastern studies, for whom I have high respect, Professor Nomkin, and the rest of the team in this panel. Actually, before answering your question, I try to relate the subject that we discussed to the topic of the conference and to Primakov ideas. I think what we see today in the Middle East is very complicated, but if we can ask this question, that how can we analyze the situation as it is with a type of Primakovian worldview, what would be the answer? And my answer is that the Middle East at large, especially after this Gaza conflict, is a mirror of international relations and a mirror of international system, and it shows transition, change, multipolarity. How? I answer this question in a type of ABC. This is actually the result of the study that we can have on the details of what happened during this conflict, as well as other issues in the Middle East. A, assumptions need to be revisited. B, building actors should be identified. Actors. And here I go to your question later. And C, the contextual dynamism should also be examined. When you look at this, you see unipolarity in analysis, unipolarity in action, and unipolarity in depiction doesn't give an answer. What we see, we should really depart from assumptions that are hegemonic, and we should take all actors into account, and the dynamism of the context really is so tense. Let me go quickly on each of these ABCs. A, assumptions. First of all, we have an assumption of hegemony in the Middle East. I think US is for hegemony in the Middle East. Has tried for hegemony, is trying. Israel is for regional hegemony also, and they explain their action in this paradigm of hegemony. It doesn't work. The recent conflict showed that hegemony is an impossibility, be it global or be it regional. Another assumption which is very important is marginalization and isolation. They tried their best to marginalize Palestinian issue, as if it's not an issue at all. It is not a conflict. It is something of the past. I think this conflict suggested that assumption of possible marginalization and possible ignorance and sidelining is an impossibility also. And I think another assumption is securitization of identities and actorship of all actors. This happened also, that they securitize. For example, Iran is a threat by everything. I think this type of securitization of Palestinian identity, Iranian identity, all didn't work. So what do we need on the base of assumptions? I think we have to depart from this type of reductionist, simplistic approach, which is packaged in a type of academic exercise or pseudo-academic exercise, and we have to look from multiple angles, not just one angle. I think Primakov tells us, look at an issue with multiple dimensions and not just a singular assumption which is taken as granted, but it proves to be wrong. So this is A. Of course, I try to be very telegraphic and not go to detail. Let's go to the B, building actors. This conflict shows that there are so many actors. We have multiple actors. And actors are not just states. We have a non-state actor as Hamas, who is able to act more than a state. We have also states as actors. We have great powers and actors. Furthermore, regional actors, I think, are more important in this context. But going beyond this state level, I think this conflict suggested that every human being is an actor. Show me anybody who is not dismayed by this massive massacre and has not shown at least an anger. Even those who try to justify have a type of problem in their own, let's say, inside. And media were actors, international organizations were actors, regional organizations. BRICS had a summit. I think this type of multiple actorship relates to what Primakov said, that if you want to analyze the situation, you cannot go. Yes, of course, US was the most important actor negatively. If it was not US support, now I go to your question. I think for all of the, let's say, conflicts from A to Z, the major supporter was United States, of course, the West at large, the collective West, the global South, the global East were all clear on their positioning. But I think the US has to be blamed because I think it was the main culprit in this whole conflict. And the moment that US is pushed or pressured to change its position or to at least have some nuances, there would be impact on the totality of the conflict. So you cannot separate Israel from the United States in this conflict. But however, it is a multiple actorship paradigm that can tell us what's going on in this conflict. Let me go to my C. contextual dynamism. I think the dynamism which was created by this conflict is of multiple layers. First of all, as my good Turkish friend suggested, normative context. I think the West has lost normatively, and it is impossible to really repair, because they were advising something else and they were acting something else. And there is no need for any type of, let's say, clarification. They wanted bombing of Gaza to continue. They even didn't use the word ceasefire. There were at least 5 attempts in the Security Council for a resolution, and they were all sabotaged. Finally, there was a minimal one, which was by Malta as an elected member proposed by Malta, which is very interesting. But I think in normative context, the West, of course, had lost its moral authority many times and many years ago, but this was really a very, very important turning point, and I think it continues this normative, let's say, bankruptcy. But it is not just this one. I think the other dynamism of this conflict was it is the most tense psychological context which created. Fear, anger, revenge. I think you see a set of complex emotionalism in this conflict, which is not limited to just the zone of conflict. It is global. I think we have globalization of emotion in this conflict. As I mentioned, everyone was dismayed. And I think this is very important for analyzing the whole situation. Finally, on the political level, it also showed all actors matter. Smaller states, look at Qatar. Regional players matter. And it is not just there are only one dimension. There are multiple dimensions, multiple dynamism. This is also where I think Primakov thinking can really help, because when you want to analyze, you have to see multiple layers, multiple centers of power in the Middle East, multiple effective processes you can consider. So to put all together, you can see that it is mirroring what's happening in the international system. The international system cannot be any more unipolar. I think it is multiple layer, multiple actor, multiple assumptions, and multiple angle. But do we have a prompt, let's say, a solution for all these conflicts? I think what we have to take into account, there are immediate steps which should be taken. Ceasefire. Now we don't have still a complete ceasefire. It is just 4 or 5 days. It should be. Then, of course, there are legal dimensions and so on and so forth. But let me end here by referring to the really hegemonic desire of the United States that shaped the Middle East. I think the U.S. should learn that Middle East cannot be shaped by the United States. And the Middle East only can be shaped by those who are in the Middle East, including the Palestinians, whose rights have been neglected for a long time. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, профессор Саджадпур. Вы видите, что у нас сегодня число профессоров.
Thank you so much. You see that the number of professors at this panel is even bigger than the number of chairs, armchairs. So, and I want to ask a personal question. Some of my Palestinian friends were surprised that in spite of all the good feelings that Iran has to Palestinian movement, Iran, a friendly Hezbollah, did not express their desire to open so-called the second front, the second battlefield against Israel. What can you say about it?
This conflict proved that Iran is the real friend of Palestinians. more importantly, Iranian narrative on Palestine proved to be right. What were Iranian points from the beginning? I think if you review what Iranian position has been after the Islamic Revolution, you come to this conclusion that Iran has been a consistent, clear friend of Palestine, and it is not, let's say, even departing 1 inch from this very principled position. On the technicalities on fronts, military operations, these are the very sophisticated issues. I think a part of it was the narrative of the press, but the Palestinians of all sides were also appreciative of the role that Iran played.
Спасибо.
Thank you. And our next speaker, Dr. Ramsey, our friend as well, an old friend, long-standing friend who participated in several Primakov reading, several sessions over the last few years. Moreover, who is a very experienced, illustrious diplomat with a very responsible post in New York. We spent some time together in Geneva preparing and carrying out the meetings of so-called Constitutional Committee. So our friend Ramsey, I welcome you, and I wanted to ask you this question. As we spoke today about Yevgeny Primakov in 2009, and the article published by him. In this article, he said that everything that we discuss and the solution of two states is in the hands of those two actors, Israel and Palestine, as today our Minister said, those two entities instead of actors. What do you think? Can Arab countries, as the role of regional states certainly absolutely is growing, and they become more independent, more sovereign from American dictate, from the attempt to impose something on them? What could you say about them, about their capacity to address this problem? Basically, not just give some cosmetic, trimming of the problem, but really solve it. Could you hear me? Could you hear the translation? Have you got the question?
Very much, Vitaly. Do you want me to read now, or do you have something else to say?
Yes.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but
Okay.
not quite clearly,
Good.
but quite enough, to understand.
Not quite. Some technical interruption. The line keeps fading out. Yeah, interpreter here. The line is very kind of spiky.
Oh, I'm sorry. I will try, and let me know if there's a problem, so I would not continue. But first of all, Vitaly, it's a pleasure to participate in a panel in which you are responsible for. But allow me also to express my appreciation to Professor Dimkin and the organizers of the Primakov readings for inviting me to this August meeting dedicated to the memory of Yevgeny Maximov Primakov, one of Russia's most outstanding diplomats and politician. I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Primakov, as you well know, Vitaly, on numerous occasions, since he was the director of IMMO and in his successive other positions. At the time, I was a counselor at the Egyptian embassy in Moscow. Coming from Egypt, I was always impressed by the breadth of his knowledge and expertise in the region. In many ways, he was prescient about the region. I cannot help but wonder how he would have related to the crisis in Gaza. I'm sure he would have had many thoughts on how to seize the opportunity in this crisis. I will not dwell on what is happening in Gaza. Other speakers have done that, and it is quite clear. But let me just say one thing. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. We are facing genocide in Gaza. No matter how you look at it, like I said, a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. Now, let me say one thing that is very clear to me, and I think to many in this region, is it can no longer be business as usual with Israel. Israel has laid bare, it's true, at least the present Israeli government has laid bare its intentions for the future. It is against a Palestinian state. I think that is quite obvious, and I think the world has to take cognizance of that and act accordingly. So it cannot be business as usual. Now, if you look at the present situation, I think there are a number of scenarios being envisaged, and I will get to answer your question. The first scenario is the two-state solution, and that there has been discussed, and we'll get back to it later. There is a one-state solution, which is favored by the Israeli right, and certainly which basically means expulsion of the Palestinians from their territories, whether in Gaza or the West. And here I will emphasize once again that the issue of expulsion or transfer, if you wish to, of Palestinians to either Egypt and Jordan is absolutely unacceptable. And the reasons are many, but primarily it means that we would be contributing to the end of the Palestinian problem and basically sweep the rug, and that Egypt will not be party to any such scheme. I think that is quite obvious. But it also poses a security threat and to Egypt, and would be highly destabilizing in the relationship between Egypt and Israel in the future. So this is off the table insofar as Egypt is concerned. The other scenario is also a one-state solution, which is favored by, I would say, many Palestinians and many people around the world, which basically speaks about a one state in which Arabs would live together as equal citizens. And that, of course, is not accepted by the present Israeli government, nor by the right-wing Israelis. The third scenario is a return status quo ante before October 7th. And that is it's obvious that it is not going to happen. And if it were, it would be done by giving some sort of fig leaf of a political process. And I can tell you from now, this is also highly destabilizing and will not endure. So I think the only option we have is the two-state solution with all its problems, with all its difficulties. But I think this is the international consensus, and I think the world has to work towards its realization. But that will need more than talking the talk. It means walking the walk. And that requires the Arabs to take action, and also all those who are interested in a durable and comprehensive peace. But of course, the main responsibility falls on the Arabs. And the Arabs have started a process, and I think it will require help from all our friends around the world, including, of course, Russia, which we have always received, but I think we will expect a little bit more down the road. Now, how to move to a two-state solution? But I think at this point, what is more important are two things. One, a durable ceasefire. that is an absolute necessity at this point. I mean, we cannot speak of day after or how the region would look like after the crisis in Gaza ends. We need to have a ceasefire immediately, and it has to be durable. The second issue, of course, is to ensure that humanitarian aid is provided to Palestinians in Gaza and even in the West Bank. And that the world has a responsibility to implement that. I mean, as you know, Vitaly, we have worked on Syria together, and there was a mechanism that in which the member international Syria support group participated, and it did play a role in ensuring that humanitarian aid reaches all over Syria. And I think something along those lines can be envisaged in the case of Gaza. And I think we need to move quickly on that. Now, I think what is required at this stage, I think, from Russia, a friend of the Arab countries and has always supported the Arab and Palestinian cause, I think are a number of things. First, continued support of Arab positions in international fora, including and particularly in the Security Council, because there will be action that will be needed there. We have always received that support, and I have no doubt we continue to receive that. Second, I think what is important is Russia should use its leverage with Israel. The relationship between Moscow and Tel Aviv has not been better, including with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I think Russia does have some leverage with Israel, and it should use this leverage to first convince Israel of the necessity of an immediate, and second, to allow unhindered humanitarian aid, and prevent Israel from widening the scope of the war, particularly in Syria and Lebanon. And I think Russia can play an important role there. Russia has a military presence in Syria, and through that, it has been in contact with Israel to stabilize the situation. So I think this needs to be taken a step further, quite frankly. Now, how Russia will use its leverage with Israel is something, of course, for Russia to determine. But I can tell you quite frankly, in our part of the world, in the Arab world, when we look at the fact that 20% of the Israeli population is of Russian descent, people are hopeful that Russia will be able to use whatever is at its disposal to convince the Israeli public that it is in their interest to forego the use of force and to live with the Palestinians side by side in a state of their own. And I think that Russia can play that role due to the influence it has amassed over the past, I would say, decade or two. That did not exist in 1973 when there was an opportunity for comprehensive peace. Today, the situation is different. The Arab world, of course, again, answering your question, the Arab world today is in a much more favorable position to a comprehensive peace. It is no longer dependent entirely, or at least some of its countries, on the United States for military protection. The economic weight of the Arab countries has been enormously enhanced over the past decades. Today, the Arab world commands maybe 60% of the oil and gas, and that is increasing. It has sovereign funds that account for more than $3 billion at their disposal, and that can be used not only to restructure relations within the global south, but also between the global south and the rest of the world. So, and by virtue of its position between Asia and Africa, Asia, which is up and coming, and Africa with all its potential, and the Arab world, is a link between these two promising regions. And I think by virtue of these conditions, it is in a much better position to chart an independent and constructive role on their own. I thank you very much.
Большое спасибо. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm not going to ask you any questions because our time is drawing to its end, but we have one more professor of our panel. Unfortunately, won't be able to speak for unknown reasons, and he apologizes, and he won't be able to. So that's why I move over to Ali Ahmad, advisor to the Russian Center of Science and Culture. And and I would like to ask you one question before you start talking. So you, just like our Iranian friends and colleagues, so they are accusing us that you are part of what is happening in Palestine and what Hamas is doing in Israel, from the viewpoint of Israel. So they think they accuse you of that. And moreover, Israel has stepped up bombings of Syria, which certainly creates a great deal of concern for all of us. Syria is being accused that it supports Hamas and is allegedly behind the activities of Hamas. Although I remember that quite recently, a few years ago, when the Syrian army started to attack successfully the positions of extremists in Damascus. So there were fights in the area of Palestine refugees, Vermuk. And so that's actually there is a city in the middle of Damascus. And you remember, just we went to this territory, we drove around, and so when it all ended, everything. And so if we look at it, they will see that there the fights were between the Syrian army on one side and the members of Hamas. And actually, so we're not talking that there was kind of an alliance between these two factions. No, it's just because they were fighting with Hamas. So what would be your take on this very complex disposition of forces and the serious position in this conflict, and what needs to be done to stop Americans from interfering in the Middle East business, and would stop to annex so this a part of Syria, which is rich in oil and wheat. How to discourage them from that. Thank you very much. Yes, first, allow me to thank the organizers of this very important conference, Primakov Readings and Professor Dinkin and Professor Wojtolowski, and all organizers of this prominent gathering. And answering your question, I would like to remind all our colleagues that that bombings of different locations in Syria until October the 7th, several times. So then they bombed they bombed Aleppo airport, Damascus airport, and other regions were bombed. And when the Israeli, when Israel, so they are saying that they're trying just so they're going against Iran, and I always say to that, so then Iran has many other ways to support Syria through a ground operation. So there is no need to use airports to bring in what Syria needs from Iran. and no need, or just even to provide, to supply Syria with weapons. There is no need for airports, and so because Iranians know that very well. And then there is the Syrian government, which is lawful, legal, and it can actually cooperate and do business with whatever country they select, and that's why they invited Russia and they invited Iran to support them as friendly countries in addressing this issue of independence. So that will be the answer to your question. So then we had some confrontation with Hamas, actually. It was a deep confrontation because they supported radical groups in Syria, al-Nusra and other Muslim groups. And but we're not going to talk about that, but we had lots of divergences, critically important divergences. But now, before this session, when I talked to Vitaly Vyacheslavovic, and so then when we spoke about this conflict, Palestinian-Israeli conflict, in my view, so before this, because this big explosion is still quite possible in the Middle East. And we should not restrict or limit ourselves with the question of Palestinian-Israeli conflict or Hamas-Israel question. We should not limit ourselves to these two questions. It's much deeper. It goes back much further away in time. And goes back, so actually this is north. It's northeast. It's not north south, but it's east-west. That's my opinion. And so there are some bullet points that I would like to verbalize. So to accuse the Arabs that they are anti-Semites, so that won't work because anti-Semites. Because we are, so they are our cousins. Jews are our cousins. So this idea of anti-Semitism won't fly in this region. And it's myself and my colleagues mentioned that it's the West. The West is an amazing construct. It's an amazing construct because it's acquiring. It's kind of double-faced. Construct. So then Mr. Lavrov was saying that they're raising issues of freedom, human rights, democracy, and all these philosophical issues, but effectively, so they're raising these issues and only for themselves and not for other peoples. So we have examples galore, 300 years ago and until now. And we know that India was a developed country before the British so turned it into a colony. And actually, so then before they came, so its economic growth was 20% of the global economic growth. And so they left the country after 100 years of colonial rule, and they just completely destroyed it. The same they're doing with China. So two examples. So when they left the country, India was in bad shape, and the same is true for China. So now just they have become much stronger, thank God. But we should not forget that the West, what they have done to Algeria. So when they turned it into a colony, so then 2 to 7 million people, and now they're asking and now they are returning. So all everything what they've done. So Cherby, they are returning what they were given by French officers. So Cherby that were against the French. Not only the French. It's not only the Germans. The Germans, Tanzania was conquered by the Germans. We know that hundreds of thousands of people during that conquest were annihilated. And that is that is why if we look deeper into it as to what's happening on the Palestinian soil in our region, it's not far from what's happening in Ukraine right now. And if we combine the history when Napoleon attacked Russia, and so at the same time Napoleon attacked the Middle East. If you know history, we are well versed in history, you know exactly the same time he attacked the Middle East as well. So he made war on them as well. And unfortunately, so this is a lengthy war. And I think that sometime, somewhere, at a certain point in time, it works out that Israel is a tool of the West. Is a tool of the West. And people are victims. Both the Israelis and the Palestinians are the victims. So certainly in this case, they are the aggressors, they are the conquerors, but they, let me repeat again, that they're victims of the West. Victims of the West. So because all the actually all the money, all the wealth that the West has created is based on the blood of all the countries they plundered and destroyed. And that is why the West does not want to go back. So never. They will certainly stick to their guns, because they will never agree just to go back. Because they can't figure out how the West can develop without sucking blood from other nations. They don't know how to act differently, and because they have not learned. And hopefully, maybe the West will develop a different mode operandi for the West, because it would be much better for the rest of the world. Because as repeatedly the Russian side has been saying and insisting, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, so we always, and so these two, Putin and Lavrov, always called them colleagues. So because they did not want unipolarity, neither East nor West, because it's very important that the United States of America maybe should dismantle itself. We do not want just the United States to crumble because it's a nuclear power. But we're talking about Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But this Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it's not only on this land. It depends largely on the policy pursued by the West to a great extent. And if I understand Mr. Ramsey correctly, when he was talking about the economic and when he enumerated the factors of the war, and we have this war, when they have this program of Ben-Gurion channel, and this is a very serious program, and it will be running parallel to Swiss channel. So simultaneously, we know that many sources of oil and gas are in the Mediterranean, and that's why there's a program that we need just to remove people from the Gaza Strip, because Ben-Gurion channel goes through Gaza, goes through Gaza Strip, and so on. Here, Hamas, it's a radical or non-radical. It's not our issue to discuss. It's what kind of an entity that is. I read a famous paper, Israeli paper, spoke to that effect, wrote to that effect. So the analysts of Israel, they're writing about that. There's a gas strip there. And that's why there are still reasonable people who are beginning to raise their voice in the world. And in the West even, they start to speak differently. And so the West cannot continue to work in the same vein. And because there's a bloodbath, rivers of blood, and the avid activities of the West, we cannot tolerate that anymore. Even not, it's not important. Radical, non-radical, Hamas is. It's not relevant. So they spoke about the peaceful. They came out with peaceful proposals for the Israelis, and they immediately refused.
So immediately, and they get rejected all the time, as Mr. Primakov rightly said in his time, that here you can feel someone else's hand. We should raise our hands ourselves, and when it participates, it's always very negative role. It has a negative role. We should do it with our own hands. Thank you, Dr. Ali. I would like to pass the floor now to one more professor, Irina Viginska. She's different from other professors by being the ex-postgraduate students of Mr. Primakov. We have two people here. I guess our colleague from Bulgaria also wrote her doctorate paper under the guidance of Mr. Primakov, and Irina is another ex-student of his. And considering what Alaga has said, it doesn't matter what kind of radical, non-radical, but still, Hamas movement, can we consider it a national movement, or is it Islamic movement? Islamic, yeah. One of the colleagues that I recently was speaking to, and partially I agree with his opinion, he says that over the last few years, Hamas did not drop a principle of Islamism, but the Islamic component in their identity gets weaker. What do you think you could say, just to describe, to classify this movement, national or Islamic? And the second question, considering that you have been working with Evgeny Primakov many years on matters of Middle East regulation, on Middle East problem solving, what can we do? How can we approach the solution of this Middle East conflict, considering that majority of the Israeli leaders, I'm not even talking about Ben Gvir mentioned everywhere, so they refuse to accept those ideas. Thank you. No, certainly not. Hamas is a national movement. It appeared. Yeah, I'm sorry. I asked. We shall come back to you certainly, but the question went to Irina. I understand that you have many things to say, but let us give you the floor as well. So, I believe that any movement can position themselves the way they want. As for Hamas, we all know that it started as Islamic organization with ideology of Muslim Brothers, and actually Israel supported them to oppose. Not for long. It's a myth, and it not exactly supported, but helped in the project, helped the Hamas project that had to do with charity, like schools or whatever. But this is a kind of naive perception, and probably some Israeli leaders were naive that they hope that Hamas will be the kind of the balance to the other organization, considering that one is secular and this one is Islamic, and there's no love lost and no understanding. But in 1987, the sheikh was imprisoned, and that's where it all ended. As for the positioning, Hamas positioning, yes, they have the right to position themselves as a religious and national organization. And over all those years, since 2006, when Hamas won the election and started ruling Gaza, their position kept changing. You cannot say that they have always been radical and anti-Israeli. As far as I remember, they even introduced changes in their own chart and made it more acceptable. It was a mix of religious and nationalistic, and they are not unique in this respect, and I don't see why they should be different from other organizations. And concerning your second question, is it possible to create two states? The answer is no, because what we are watching, what we see now, confirms very contradictory things. On one hand, we have a conflict that has never been pacified over many decades, though it kept changing. There was transformation. Moreover, the whole region went through transformations, the whole Middle East. And remember what we were thinking about 2 months ago. Say, look, the Middle East becomes a case of normalization, de-escalation. Look how now well they do between Saudi and Iran, like Turkey is getting closer to Arab states, and no one could foresee this explosion. This though we always kept saying that unregulated conflict, those smoldering conflicts always have a trend to blow up. But this case is unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented, because never so far over the whole history of Israel, any military organization that sometimes would kill Israeli, took hostages, but not at this scale, not so intentionally cruel to cause this response from Israel. They know pretty well what Israel is, and especially if you consider the fact that present Israeli government is a unique combination of secular nationalists with religious nationalists, the same phenomena, religious and nationalistic. I think that presently what we got from the new Middle East, the main thing is that this conflict so far has not expanded to a wider one involving other states or non-national, non-state actors. And so far we can state that we see very pragmatic approach of other states. No one wants expansion and further getting this conflict out of proportion. Everyone wants to finish this conflict as soon as possible, but it's impossible to finish it quickly. This is the most horrible conclusion. You listed some 5 options what can be done. Palestinian administration, international rule, Arab. No options will happen that you name. Presently, only one thing. That's what Israel wants and consider it possible, though I believe that their strategy, they are not having any decent strategy. They want to control the north completely and keep their armed forces there, and in themselves, they want to control the south themselves and allow international organizations to provide humanitarian aid. They probably dropped the idea of exterminating, just killing all Hamas people wherever they find. They won't do that in the south because it absolutely unacceptable collateral damage, too many deaths. And they will just try to track and kill terrorists wherever they find them, in other countries, in the Middle East, and they believe they will do it, though I doubt I doubt very much. And this long period of some unfinished intermediary state of Gaza, and Gaza population of Gaza is very negative, because sooner or later Gaza will leave the front pages of media magazines. We leave pictures in internet, images in newspapers, and when those pictures, those Gaza images will be substituted by something else, then I'm afraid that the interest to the problem of Palestine, unfortunately, may go to the back burner. But there is good news as well. As it is a lengthy process, it will certainly cause some movement inside the states involved, and we can probably expect a resignation of Netanyahu, and probably even a jail term for those Israeli leaders who have been shouting all their lives that they arranged great security, but actually what they did, they ensured colossal failure of security and great sufferings for their own and Palestinian population. Thank you so much, Irina. I believe we have some time for questions. Please, I ask the audience to raise their hands and ask those questions. My name is Daria from Moscow Institute of International Relations. Good afternoon. And the attention of the whole world is glued to the situation in Gaza and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other problematic situation of Middle East, and situation in Yemen and Libya, and situation in Syria. It all goes to the back burner indeed. And do we believe that largely this present situation in this Israeli-Palestinian conflict may hinder normalizing of the situation in Syria, reforms in that country, and actually slow down the final resolution of the Syrian conflict? And may it happen that this explosion of this lengthy conflict was artificially arranged to prevent Syria and other players to resolve their conflict? My question goes to Mr. Ramzi and Al Ahmed. Thank you so much. Mr. Ahmed, yes, I tend to agree with your conclusion that probably it might have been orchestrated to destabilize the situation in Syria and the Middle East. And when I mentioned that, in our region, there are several projects. One of them that we know is Chinese project, One Belt, One Way. And naturally, Russia plays a great role in Syria and in the Middle East in order to keep the balance in the situation. And the West cannot live without it. Once you don't sell arms, if you don't steal goodies, so you cannot live without it. So no chance in hell they want stabilization. One of the options is exactly what you say. And I will remind you that Mr. Ramzi spoke about the project, exactly in the project in Sector Gaza, to control the oil and gas deposits on the shore of Lebanon, Palestine and Syria on one hand. On the other hand, what I said about the Ben Gurion channel, this is the opposition to the Chinese project, One Belt, One Way, and at the same time Eurasian philosophy of Russia, including the cooperation with Syria. So I agree with you. Now, for balance, we shall pass the floor to the ambassador of Yemen, so His Excellency. And after you, our colleague from Armenia.
Thank you very much. I think this session of Primakov reading is the most relevant one with all the respect to other sessions, because Primakov was a great friend of our region and also big experience in the developments in our region. And of course, I understand that this issue of Gaza dominated the whole discussion related to the Middle East. But still, one lesson maybe the panelists can share with me, that whenever the religious matter is used, it backfires. This is the experience we have in the Arab side. And today, when this government in Israel is the most extremist one, and also giving more weight for the fanatics there in the government, for sure it will backfire on the situation in Israel itself. But the situation for sure after Gaza war will not be as it was before. And not only the issue of two states or one state solution or whatever, the most important thing is that a lot of analysts are focusing on the discrimination policies of the Israeli government. And they will go to the extent that it is almost to be of an apartheid system. And we saw how in South Africa this was ended. That's why my question to the panelists, that whatever it is, two-state solution or one state, of course, with equal rights to everybody in a democratic state, provided that it should be, a just and lasting peace in the region. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, пожалуйста, вам. Я вас только...
Thank you. My request, please be brief, colleagues. We have little time. We have only one question left. Elena, if we have time for that, I'll try to be brief. My question to Dr. Naumkin, and if Irina will want to contribute, I'll be happy. You said that in Israel there may be multiple goals, and Hamas has only one clear goal: to vacate, to free the territory. My question is, what territory? Gaza became free in 2006. Correct me if I'm wrong. If they want other territories free from what? And a little bit wider, Hamas started military operation that could not end in victory by default. Military victory was absolutely impossible. What then was the purpose? So freedom for what? From what? What kind of territory, if it was the goal? And did they manage to reach that goal or not? May try to answer, just not to forget. And then I will pass the floor to, and the first question will go to our, who did you ask this question to? Good. Briefly. So what was the goal? What they wanted to achieve with the operation? So you need to ask them, because I am not in charge of them. I cannot speak for them. And as for the freedom for for what move. Hamas have their own vision of Palestine. They want to set all Palestine free. They are against the recognition of Israel, and from their extremist slogan of complete refusal, negation of the rights of Israel. So they do not recognize Israel. They are for the long so-called pacification, pacifying. Arab colleague, no, what is a would know? Probably decades. It will last for decades, this kind of truce, without signing the peace treaty, so that at any moment it can be stopped. But they believe it is just accepting the reality, and that's what they proclaim. In Moscow, we had Palestinian meetings, and Hamas participated, and other Islamistic radical organization, and the goal was to push them to unite on some common grounds. And but even agreeing to this simple formula, it's difficult for them to agree to creating a Palestinian state with the capital in eastern Jerusalem. So what then? They say no, because what about the West? If you accept the East, then you accept the West. So that's a platform, and they are kind of migrating from that radical to more moderate position. And I believe it's not bad that it's happening, but that's where I would like to stop. And what about the second question?
Would you like, to respond so Elena Suponina, and then one more question because our time is almost up. And thank you, Elena Suponina, a Russian politologist. So the day after tomorrow, we'll celebrate 76 years since the resolution of the General Assembly to set up two states. Russia talks about that, but the question is about mechanisms. And this mechanism is should be directed at Irina Donovna and Shasta. So the way we talked is how the global community may help to set up Palestine. Some say so, not to reanimate a quartet. Some speak about the presence of other countries, international presence there. And the same question to Mr. Sajjadpour: does Iran think that by joint international efforts the Palestine issue can be resolved and addressed, or this is the issue of opposition and fight until the end, and there will be no end to it? I can answer very quickly, very shortly. Yes. So this. So we celebrate. We're going to celebrate the date, but it brings back very sad connotations. Because the decision was made, but the Palestinian state was not set up. So then the international format, and if it's realistic, it's not about format. If there is an international format, then we can just put both sides at the negotiating table and reach an agreement. No. So it's a special conflict. It's an unlikely conflict where the main role is played by identity. It cannot be overcome by simple solution. So let's divide this land. So this is our piece. This is our piece. This is our plot. This is yours. And then you can. It's not. It cannot be resolved like that. Then there is another issue, very important. That came around recently. So the Western Bank of Israel. So then it's huge level of interdependence. It's impossible to extricate one from the other. So because certainly we can play with the idea of independent state, but still related to Israel. How realistic to make a fully independent state when they're so mixed and mingled together. Okay, so one last question, then we're going to finish.
About Pakistan, I am in charge of Iran program there. My question is directed to Dr. Sajjadpur. Sir, when looking at the conflict transformation theory, we see that Palestine issue was first became the Arab-Israel conflict in which Arab badly lost. Then we see the second phase in which Palestine issue became the Iran-Israel conflict in which it became a sort of a balanced situation. And now this is the third phase in which we are seeing that Palestine issue has become the indigenous struggle in which Hamas and Palestine Islamic Jihad are present. So how do you see that this conflict transformation would impact the greater Middle East in the longer run? Thank you.
Yes.
First of all, I think on the issue of Iranian position of Palestine and the future, I think the Iranian position is very clear and principled, and it is based on a very clear solution, and that is to see the views of the people of the land of Palestine through an internationally known concept as referendum. Now, on the issue of transformation, I think it is very important not to, let's say, singularize just one dimension of Palestinian issue. First of all, I think more importantly, of course, it has Islamic Muslim dimension. All Muslims are touched by this. It is an Arab issue, or Arabs are touched. But I think more important, it's a humanistic issue. All human beings are concerned about this conflict. So whatever the transformation may be on grouping, organization, I think it is very simple. The people of Palestine have been deprived of a simple right, that is to live in their own land, and they have been expelled from their land. So I think this humanistic view is reflected in Muslim thinking, is reflected in Arab thinking, and is reflected in international, let's say, feeling about this issue. So we cannot limit it to one, let's say, one dimension. It is a more inclusive process, but I think the more we see these massacres, genocides, as Ambassador Ramsey said, I think globally people understand the depths of the nature of Zionist entity.
Уважаемые коллеги, я благодарю всех.
I'd like all the speakers and all those who have been asking questions, and I'm sorry that we are, unfortunately, those who failed to ask their questions, but our time is up, so we have a coffee break, and then we'll continue. Thank you.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, сессия 3 «Китай, США, соперничество, взаимосвязь, глобальный контекст» начнется через 20 минут. Dear ladies and gentlemen, session 3 «China, United States,